Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page, and I'm thrilled that my guest on this episode is one of the greatest restaurateurs in American history, Drew Nieporent. You may know him from Nobu or the Tribeca Grill, which he opened with a partner I'm certain you know, some guy named Robert De Niro. And we'll talk about that, but that's only part of the story. Drew, how you doing?
Doing great, David. Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to chat. You are a towering figure in the industry, and I very much appreciate your joining me.
Thank you.
I want to start with a quote from a few years back in the New York Times, which said of you, Drew Nieporent may be the last old-school restaurateur standing. What is a restaurateur as you see it?
For me, I think there's a lot of pretend restaurateurs today. And what I mean by that is there are people who have a lot of money, open a restaurant, sometimes varying degrees of success, and they become obviously restaurateurs because they're in the restaurant business. For me, the definition of a restaurateur is somebody who worked their way up from the very bottom and learn, the tricks of the trade and work in various different positions such that they have a knowledge, an expertise about food, about service, about wine. And that gives somebody the right to call themselves a restaurateur. And then when I did it, I started in 1985. But in 1990, I opened Tribeca Grill. And between 1990 and 2000, I opened about 35 restaurants. So, a restaurateur is really somebody who works their way up from the bottom, gets their fingernails dirty. But even preceding me, there were a couple of tremendous restaurateurs. For instance, Joseph Baum, who created Windows on the World, and he created the Rainbow Room, worked for Restaurant Associates, and they had a plethora of restaurant concepts and things. So I sort of patterned myself after him to a certain degree because even from a young age, David, I wanted to do a lot of different places. I wanted to express myself and my knowledge of food in a lot of different scenarios. And quite frankly, for me, because I grew up with a father who worked for the state liquor authority, my father took us to restaurants in the 60s when we were kids. We were, probably starting when I was about 5 or 6. And, I saw these incredible restaurants, every kind, fancy French restaurants, Chinese, Greek, Italian, of course. Back then, there were some German restaurants.
Luchow's?
I knew Luchow's. It was on 14th Street. I went once to Luchow's, but it was after, what's his name, took it over. It was a guy in the government. He was a pretend restaurateur, to be honest with you, because he opened a bunch of places and they were terrible. Look, a restaurateur is a little like a football coach. And you see how many coaches go in and out of the system? So anybody can be named a coach, but a guy like Belichick or a guy like, the guy at Pittsburgh that hangs around for a while because he's successful. He knows what he's talking about. A restaurateur has to know what they're talking about. But in the 60s, when my father was taking us out to these places, my point to you was that I immediately, right away, this is what I was going to do. And I was taking it all in all the time when we go out for dinner.
That was a very unusual upbringing.
Yeah, my mother was an actress, beautiful woman, actress as a child in radio before television. And, my father married my mother when he was 37. She was 21. There were a lot of differences there. But my father had grown up in the Depression and a job, the state liquor authority was you're an employee of the state. It's not a high-paying job at all. And my mother had sort of images of living on the Riviera, and my father and our family, we lived on the East River area, Peter Cooper. So but my father with the restaurants and food, he provided me with the education. It was extraordinary. I'll give you just a quick example. Like there was a coffee shop on 56th Street and 6th called Al Green's. Mm-hmm. As a kid, I'd look at the menu and I'd see Reuben sandwich 3 times on the menu. And each time it was on the menu, it had different prices. So one day I said to Al Green, I go, Al, is it a typo? Reuben sandwich is 3 times on the menu. He goes, no. He goes, we get a lot of tourists in here. So, if they order the Reuben sandwich, we charge them the highest of the 3 prices. So, I learned all the dodgy behavior as well as, great stuff about food and other things, of course.
What is it about the food experience that resonated with you at a young age?
It was extraordinary to me. Cooking. I would watch Graham Kerr, The Galloping Gourmet. I love Graham Kerr. It was amazing. And Julia Child, of course, as well. And when I would babysit, I'd look at the bookshelves, the people I was babysitting for, and I'd read all the cookbooks. I had a fascination with cooking. And in the 60s, we had a maid. Her name was Emma Anderson, and she'd come in We had a tiny little kitchen at Peter Cooper, but she would cook, corned beef and stuffed cabbage and tongue. I'd watch her cook. And then, I started learning how to cook and almost burned the kitchen down half the time. But going out to the restaurant, like especially the ethnic restaurants, it was seeing all these different foods. Like, how did they come out so beautifully presented, so intricate the preparation? It was startling to me. So I set the wheels in motion about learning the tricks of the trade.
Did you find yourself wanting to be a chef?
Yes, I wanted to be a chef. In fact, the whole thing was I had this dream of going to Lausanne, Switzerland. They have a terrific hotel school there, and learning how to be a chef. The reality was one day I went to very good schools, public schools in New York, but I went to Stuyvesant High School, which is a specialized high school. You have to take an exam to get in. And one day my mother came home and she said, Willie Weisberg's mother said to me that Cornell has a hotel school. And I go, Mom, Cornell is an Ivy League school. I'm like number 500 in the class of 700 for my grades at Stuyvesant High School. I'm not getting into an Ivy League school. And she said, well, maybe we should apply. And back then, the applications for the state universities that I was going to be applying to, they were $5. The application for Cornell was $20. And I swear to God, my father was so incensed. First of all, that I was applying to a school where the tuition was $5,000 a year. That was one thing. But that the application cost $20 and not $5. Well, needless to say, I don't know how I got in, but maybe it was like they needed students from New York City because Cornell Hotel School, I remember the first day and we had an orientation meeting and people were from everywhere, the Bahamas and Savannah, Georgia and Ohio, and nobody was from New York. So that was the education in a way in and of itself. So yeah, I got into Cornell and then realized that Cornell was not going to bring me to the promised land. I wasn't going to learn how to cook at Cornell. The first cooking class I had at Cornell was they hand you a booklet and it said how to cook onion soup. Open a number 10 can of onion soup, pour it in a onion kettle, heat it up, and put a cheese crouton on top. I said, what? This is totally a coincidence, I would think. I was a freshman, 18 years old. And there was a notice on the dean's bulletin board that somebody had posted, said, looking for 6 people experienced in Russian service to sail to the following ports: Leningrad, Dublin, Stockholm, Copenhagen, Oslo. And I had never, and I mean never, had worked as a waiter. I worked at McDonald's in 1972, the corner McDonald's on 23rd Street, right up from where we lived. And I immediately called the guy's name. His name was Uwe Christensen, German student. I applied for the work, and he said, do you have experience? I said, oh, yeah, no, I worked in Kutcher's, the Concord, something like that.
My uncle worked at Kutcher's. He was the food and beverage manager.
There you go. Okay. A lot of great people actually did work at those Borscht Belt places. And he gave me the job. It's 1974. I get on the MS Vista Fjord. There's 60 waiters in the dining room. The dining room seats 600, and I'm wearing a light blue shirt. Now, everyone in the world knows that a waiter's outfit is white shirt, but I'm wearing a light blue shirt. So guess what? I was outed. And everyone knew that, I had never.
You hadn't done it before.
I didn't know what I was doing. But it's like learning how to ride a bike. You do it a couple of times. That was a 42-day cruise. You work breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week. The kitchen was downstairs by escalator. People would hold a tray over their heads with 3 fingers. I would hold a tray with 2 hands. They knew I was a total imposter. But I was convivial. The customers were all old and from, Podunk and wherever they were from, who had money in their old age. And they loved the fact that I could speak English because all the other waiters were European or Scandinavian or Italian, whatever they were. And, they were having trouble speaking the English. And my customers at least could communicate with me.
Define Russian service.
Okay, so when you used to go to a banquet or a wedding, they would put the plates, an empty plate in front of you, and then go around the table with a platter of filet mignon or whatever it was, vegetables, and they serve you from platter to plate. Everything on the MS Vista Fjord was put on a platter, even if it was for 2 people. And you'd have to serve it a la Russe, Russian style. That's what Russian service is. And I knew what Russian service was because there was a booklet that they gave Cornell students that talked about it. So I had read about it and, I knew what it was. Did I know how to hold a fork and a spoon in order to serve somebody food? Obviously I didn't, but I practiced. And that part of it, even to this day, I'm pretty good at something like that. But back then I was 18 years old and I went to all these extraordinary ports of call. And then later I went every year for 4 years, Christmas cruises, summer cruises. When I graduated, I wasn't even offered a job, David. So I went back on a Mediterranean cruise and went to Croatia and all that kind of Yugoslavia. Luckily, I missed the draft.
So after the cruise experience, I'm assuming you can now hold a tray with 3 fingers over your head. So you came back to New York.
1977, right? I graduated Cornell. I had applied to Rockefeller Resorts, Hyatt International, and I think it was Westin back then. They've changed the name a couple of times. And all 3 companies did not offer me a job. So I didn't have a job. But there was a guy who had graduated Cornell. His name was Tom Knighting, general manager of Maxwell's Plum. Now, Maxwell's Plum was an extraordinary restaurant in New York, 64th Street, First Avenue.
I remember Maxwell's Plum.
He offered me a job at Maxwell's, and I accepted, and I was paid $300 a week.
Whoa!
Assistant restaurant director of a restaurant that had 250 seats and could serve as many as 900 people on a Saturday night.
Good Lord.
It was a great experience. Also, the menu had about 150 items on it out of a little kitchen. I don't know how we ever did that.
So you're working at Maxwell's Plum, then you cycle through some tremendously upscale restaurants.
Here's the thing. I always had a fascination with politics, and I was offered a job, the United States Senate dining rooms in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol building.
With the Navy bean soup.
Exactly. How do you know that?
I know stuff.
That's pretty cool. And I was about to take the job. And the craziest thing happened. The director of food service for the Washington outlets was friendly with the general manager of the Tavern on the Green. Now, Maxwell's Plum, the owner, Warner Leroy, had just built Tavern on the Green. Extraordinary.
In Central Park.
Right in the middle of Central
Did
Park.
it have the big glass windowed room then?
The crystal room, which is all
That's
glass
the
and
one.
closed. And the ceiling had all chandeliers and looked like a wedding cake. So this guy, Jay Treadwell, who was in charge of Washington, was friendly with Hugo Rowley, was the general manager of Tavern on the Green. And they basically did a behind-the-scenes deal to keep me in New York. Jay rescinded the offer, told me I had to go work at Tavern on the Green. It wasn't a terrible thing to go to Tavern on the Green because I realized it could be the greatest restaurant in the world because it was so magnificent. And it had been doing very poorly. And so when I went there, it was like a proving grounds to me. I went in there, I think I'd done like 15 million the first year or second year. And then I changed things. I did a lot of stuff. You know, they increased my salary from $300 to $550, which was extraordinary at that time. You know, I'm managing like 250 waiters and doing a good job. I love working there. But what happened was, I guess it's kind of like, you know, you feel underappreciated. And I gave my notice, and Warner Leroy told me, he said, you know, I was going to make you the general manager, you know, but it's a little too little too late. And that's when I ran the New York Marathon in 1983, took a extraordinary trip to California to see Spago and Michael's and Campton Place in San Francisco, Forno's Ovens, and get more of an education. And guess what, David?
What?
I was offered the day before I go on a plane to California, I get a call from Tom Margatai. Now, Tom Margatai was the owner of the Four Seasons.
Hello.
Like if you're Bill Belichick and you leave the New England Patriots, what's the one call you want to get? You want to get a call from an owner of the NFL who wants you. So I go to the Four Seasons. This is the day before I go to California. And I meet Alex von Bitter, who was Swiss guy. He ran the restaurant, one of the great restaurateurs of our era. And he says to me, he says, you know, we all have to agree. If we're going to hire you at the Four Seasons, we all have to agree about you. And like I knew Julian Nicolini, who was his partner in the dining room. And then Margatai already seemed like he liked me. And I had not met Paul Covey. So I meet Paul Covey. Now, I was a member of the New York Athletic Club. I used to see Paul Covey in the pool where it's men only. And he'd be on a settee reading the Italian newspapers. And I was like, that's the guy I want to be one day. Paul Covey was Tom Margatai's partner. It was like a two-man team, Margatai and Covey, and then below them was Alex von Bitter and Julian Nicolini. He didn't even ask me any questions about myself. So I'm like, okay, Margatai likes me, Covey likes me, Alex von Bitter likes me, and I know Julian Nicolini. I go on the trip, I come back, and at that time I was working at a French restaurant called La Reserve. They called me to the phone. They said, you have a call. Get to the phone, and Alex is on the phone. He goes, you know how I told you we would all have to agree upon you if we're going to hire you? I said, yes. He says, well, we didn't. So unfortunately, I can't offer you a job. David, here's the thing. Michael Douglas, the actor, one day said 9 out of 10 movies are made out of revenge. And I just was like, that's it. I'm going to prove to these guys they made a mistake. And they did, because I wound up opening 40 restaurants in my career. I'm the, originator of Nobu, which still exists. It's probably the greatest restaurant concept ever in the last 25. Well, it's actually, we're open 30 years. You have Jean-Georges, you have Daniel Boulud, you have Alain Ducasse, you have great chefs, you have great restaurants all over the country. Thank goodness. Nothing, and I mean nothing, holds a candle to the success of Nobu. So in other words, my career, because these guys wouldn't hire me, would have taken a totally different path. So now I worked at La Réserve, Le Périgord, Le Régence, La Grenouille, and I'm working in these French restaurants and I'm learning how to carve ducks and serve in this phony French BS environment. But I'm learning a lot about wine. And what am I thinking? I'm thinking, I gotta open my own restaurant. Why? Because when I was a student at Cornell and my fellow students would say, hey, Drew, what are you gonna do on graduation? I'm gonna open my own restaurant. What do you do? I'm gonna open my own restaurant. And guess what? Now it's like 7 years later and I'm working as a captain in a French restaurant. I don't have a pot to piss in. I don't have the money, but I want to open my own restaurant, right? So one day I'm just jogging and I had just read that a space was available, 1,500 square feet for $1,500 a month, West Broadway. And I knew Chanterelle had opened in the West Broadway area. It was really on Grand Street, but off of West Broadway. And I jogged down there and I saw the space and I was like, I can afford $18,000 a year in rent. And I signed the lease. And then at that point, you know what the name of the restaurant was? The Silverado Trail. I was going to open a American restaurant. Larry Forgione had opened an American place very successfully. American cuisine was becoming acceptable and respected. And I had been to the Napa Valley. I loved the Silverado Trail and all the wineries. And that's what I was going to do. And then working at La Grenouille, somebody had ordered a bottle of Le Morachet. And Le Morachet is, the most expensive wine, French wine. And it's Louis Latour, and as I'm pouring the wine, I swear to you, I'm looking at this, and it's like talking to me, and it's like it's like a message. It's glowing green gold, and I was like, "That's it, Montrachet. That's what I'm going to call the restaurant." And that's what I did. I opened a restaurant in April of 1985 called Montrachet, and guess what? 7 weeks after we opened, we got 3 stars from the New York Times.
You hired a chef who would become famous.
Well, see, my mother was a casting director after she was an actress. So in the restaurants, what's the most important thing that you do? We don't call it casting, but we hire the staff. On my trip to the West Coast, my last day in California, I met David Bouley at a restaurant called Sutter 500, an obscure restaurant. The food was unbelievable. When I got back to New York, I called him up. I said, listen, I'm thinking of opening a restaurant. Would you be interested? He said, yes. He came to New York. He got a job at Vienna 79, which was a 3-star restaurant at the time. He was very strange about a lot of things. My wife, we used to have him over to the apartment, and it was my girlfriend at the time. She used to say, how are you going to control him? But you have to understand, in my head, it's like, well, how am I going to control? Of course, I'm Drew. I'm like, no problem. When we opened this restaurant, I'm telling you, David, the food that we served in 1985 is better than most people serve today. I priced the menu. I was working at La Grenouille. It was $75 prefix. You know what my prefix was?
What?
16. 16.
Wow.
16 for 3 courses. Because the French restaurants were all based on facades. First of all, the menu was in French. The wine lists were very intimidating. There was a dress code. I did away with all that. One time I got a call and they said, what's the dress code? I said, as long as the feet and the genitals are covered, everything's cool. The New York Times, Michael Gross is the fashion writer, happened to be like sitting at a table right behind me. And he wrote in the New York Times that day, overheard at Montrachet, the head waiter, when discussing dress code, the feet and the private parts have to be covered.
Couldn't say genitals in the New York Times, huh?
He cleaned it up. But the point is, so did away with dress code. The menu was in English. The wine list, even though it was small, was very, very accommodating. And I also hired a guy named Daniel Jonas, who today works with Daniel Boulud, but he's one of the great wine people. And, back then, maybe there was a sommelier at the 21 Club, but there were no sommeliers. And now every restaurant has a wine director.
Who may or may not know what he's talking about as he directs you to a more expensive bottle than you want.
That's what happens now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But back then, it all lined up. But David Bouley deserves all the credit in the world because the food was extraordinary. We get 3 stars from Brian Miller in the New York Times. I could have filled Shea Stadium. The phone never stopped ringing. It was unbelievable. I was there 22 years after that. And then I converted that restaurant 22 years later to Cortone. It got 3 stars. It got 2 Michelin stars. And then Batard was the third rendition in the same space where Montrachet was with Marcus Glocker. And we got 3 stars again. And then because of the pandemic, and I thought about this the other day, the pandemic really screwed everything up. During the pandemic, I had 3 employees left and no chef, no cooks. I had no general manager, no waiters. I had a pastry assistant. I had a dishwasher and I had a runner. And I said, I'm not going to let COVID put me out of business. I reconstituted, hired a new chef, new general manager, everything. And we got a Michelin star in the final year. And last May, I sold the restaurant to a husband and wife who this last Wednesday literally got 3 stars in the New York Times.
So how'd you end up in business with Robert De Niro?
Everybody wanted to go to Montrachet. And Robert De Niro came in as a customer. And he used to have a girlfriend. Her name was Tookie Smith, whose brother, Willie Smith, was Willie Wear, designer of women's clothing. She was a model. And Tookie one day came in with Bob, and it was like, Bob wants to know if you want to open another restaurant in Tribeca. And I was like, this is crazy, So De Niro and I walked up the block, and he showed me the space. And it was like this huge, cavernous, amazing space, amazing. And I was like, yep. And I was trying to get something out of him, but he really wasn't forthcoming, like what his vision was. So basically, Tribeca Grill was the American restaurant, not exactly Silverado Trail, but it was the American restaurant that I had always wanted to do.
Which means what? What was on the menu?
I mean, look, in my career, I've done every kind of restaurant you can think about. I did a Vietnamese restaurant, obviously Japanese with Nobu, French with Montrachet, Italian with Luca and Boca Raton. So the American idea with Tribeca Grill was a little bit, like River Cafe. Larry Forgione had worked there and opened his own American restaurant. Charlie Palmer was a really American chef who took over the River Cafe. And then I relied on Charlie, because we were friends, to see if there was somebody in his kitchen who he felt could step up and be a chef and work with me. And he chose a guy named Don Pentabona, who was Italian, but, cooked American food. And what American is really an amalgam of a lot of things. It's like, you can have a roast chicken next to an Asian-inspired dish. We had spring rolls on the menu at that time. You can have a raw tuna dish. It's not Japanese, but it's like a crudo, but it's not Italian either. But Don had traveled in Asia, and he had great experience because he worked at the River Cafe. So when Tribeca Grill opened, it was an American restaurant. And, some people didn't even realize that because it's Robert De Niro as my partner. So it's like, right. Of course it's going to be an Italian restaurant. We opened in 1990, April of 1990. It was another over-the-top, huge success. I don't remember too many problems.
Come on. What's it like working with a Hollywood star? Is he in the kitchen going, I don't like that?
No, not at all. And in fact, he's kind of a little bit, he is mysterious in a lot of ways, but he basically left me alone. At the beginning, he pulls in this accountant. His name was Bert Pindell. He had clients like Madonna, but he was new to the rap world, and he represented like Russell Simmons and a lot of the rap people. Then later Britney Spears. So he had influence, but he became confident in my ability. There was one moment when we find the space for Nobu. Nobu was always my idea. This is 100% my idea. And I handed him a business plan. This is the number of covers, average check $50, blah, blah, blah. We're going to do $2.3 million a year. And he looks at me, he goes, who the hell is going to spend $50 on raw fish? And the rest is history. Nobu is the most successful thing ever. But Bert was instrumental in that Tribeca Grill. And then we brought in Sean Penn, Bill Murray, Mikhail Baryshnikov, Christopher Walken, Ed Harris.
As investors.
As all investors. Frank DeLeo, who played Tootie in Goodfellas, and he was Michael Jackson's manager. And that was a kick in the butt. I mean, let's face it, signing these sheets, and it's my name and Sean Penn. They were big back then, but they weren't Sean Penn. I mean, Bill Murray, today they're huge. But today, De Niro's 80 years old. But he's still
your partner, right?
He's still my partner. To his credit, he had an image. He wanted to buy this building and put all creative movie people in the building, and he wanted a restaurant on the main floor, on the bottom floor, and he got it.
And it became, and is to this day, one of the defining restaurants of New York.
It is, but nobody gives a crap.
What do you mean nobody gives a crap?
Something, listen, I don't want to be the person who bemoans it used to be this way. And, because I remember, that when I was a young person, I was like, stop already. The one thing I recognize, And it's, I should pat myself on the back a little bit because of people like me, Danny Meyer, Steven Starr, obviously Rich Melman in Chicago, and Wolfgang Puck to a certain degree. Our restaurants were so distinguished that it behooved everybody else to raise their game. And they were supposed to be the best, but there were a lot of facades there, a lot of phony baloney. And, I worked at McDonald's. And to this day, that was one of the great experiences in my life, such that for the last 12 years, I do the hamburgers at Madison Square Garden, the Daily Burger at Madison Square Garden. And honestly, food that you get at these stadiums is usually god-awful. And my burger, and it's the proof's in the pudding. I don't have to hype it. More people stop me and go, your burger. Then they stop me and say, I love Nobu. It's crazy. So what I've learned really now is that the problem is when I say what I said about Tribeca Grill, we're in our 34th year. Restaurants like that would be like honored. 21, Four Seasons, Rainbow Room, they're all gone. This generation could give a flying woohoo about an old restaurant. It's all about the cocktails and are they playing a certain amount of music and everything that I've done in my career, which I obviously I'm very happy about and I stand behind, is about upgrading the food. The point I'm trying to make is generationally, and I've always believed this too, every generation has sort of their own tastes, what they gravitate towards.
Well, what do they gravitate towards now?
It has to do with the influencers. At one point, the influencers were what? They were food writers. What did they write about? Pizza, tacos, hamburgers, food trucks. And they rave about this. So when the influencers or the press was giving equal time, there's only so much you can write about food. Oh, the greatest pizza. I grew up, pizza was a nickel. I don't even think I've ever had a bad slice. It's like what's the big deal? Tacos. I admire tacos, fine. You get them on the street. So in other words, the reverence of the 3 stars dissipated. Then the pandemic came. Then Pete Wells in the New York Times did away with the stars. So he reviewed, let's just say, at least 50 restaurants, gave no stars. So now when he gives the stars back, nobody goes to the restaurants that he gave those stars to because they don't know if we should go to those restaurants based on the star system. It's all convoluted.
That brings us to a huge change in food over the last, 30 years. What do you think of celebrity chefs?
Here's a little patting myself on the back.
Feel free.
1982. I was the general manager of a restaurant on Fifth Avenue and 9th Street called 24 Fifth Avenue. Mm-hmm. We had a woman chef, which was a novelty at that time, Leslie Revson. She had worked at the Waldorf Astoria, had her own restaurant in the Village called Restaurant Leslie. Excellent. And on the menu, I wrote Executive Chef Leslie Revson. The owner came to me and he was like, what's your name on the menu for? I said, it's like a movie. And a movie poster, you see the actors and who the movie's starring. And this woman has some profile. Some people know her.
So you started this?
Well, no, I'm not saying I started it. Well, let's just say I recognized it to make the chef the important person. So then everybody started doing that. And then there's some restaurants today, they put the entire kitchen staff on there because I can't even express this to you enough. Not the word team. Every single chef in the world, our team. And you know what? God bless. And they're all working hard. But you know what? Not everybody's loyal. So you can have a team and then and pay them well and have great conditions. And then they're like, oh, we're going around the corner. This new place is opening. We're going to go work for that guy. So my experience is, yes, I promoted the chefs and they got celebrity status because the food writers then started writing about them. But the point I'm trying to make to you is the provenance of these celebrity chefs, it didn't happen overnight. Most of them deserve their status. Most of them do. Some are fly-by-night. Some don't hang in there for a long period of time.
Well, the guy, and back then it was all men, but the soul, the identity of a restaurant used to be the front of the house guy.
Well, that's right.
Cirio Macchione. Yeah, it was Cirque, or frankly, you.
I joke about it. I like, do you hear that sound? It's a dinosaur. The sound of the dinosaur, that's us. Cirio had Daniel Boulud. And he was writing a tremendous, even though Ruth Reichel, when she wrote the review, it was one of the great reviews ever. She wrote A Tale of Two Restaurants because she went in unrecognized.
I read it.
Like crap. She went in when they recognized her. Syria did what Syria does. When Daniel Boulud leaves, Le Cirque never achieved the quality of food that Daniel provided. So it shows you, it's like an actor's performance in a movie also. It shows you that not everyone's created equal. There are exceptional people, and some of those exceptional people are now in that status of celebrity chefs. Like Thomas Keller deserves every accolade he gets because he's a decent human being. And there's so many people in that category now. So I have no problem with it, to be honest.
But you do have a generation of chefs coming up who got into this to be TV stars, as opposed to because their passion in life is making people happy with food. Am I wrong?
Well, you'd be shocked to know that those people that you just talked about, most cases fail in the restaurant business. Like the TV chefs, they open a restaurant and it opens and then it dissolves.
So, Drew, what's coming up for you now? I know you've gotten involved in food as a part of social justice. Tell me about that.
Well, no, I'm not really too much of a do-gooder. I've been on the board of City Meals on Wheels, that charity, for 25 plus years. I've been on the board of Garden of Dreams, Madison Square Garden's charity, for many years. I lend my time, the restaurant's time, to these causes. There's always something like the Super Bowl. I went to 24 Super Bowls because we had an event there called Taste of the NFL, raised money for world hunger. They did away with that event. Honestly, I'm in the twilight of my career, and I realize it. And I don't want to do that much more. But it's a little like I thought I was out and they pulled me back in.
That was Pacino.
Yeah, Pacino.
Godfather 3, I think. Yeah.
That was Pacino.
So what's ahead for you?
I would love, believe it or not, to do a deli. Because you talked about borscht. For instance, there are no good delis in New York anymore. They talk about Katz's because it's the only thing that's left. My father took me there when I was 5, and it's been there forever. I'd like to do a modern deli. There was, years ago in California, my friend Michel Richard, who was a great chef, great French chef. He interpreted the deli, and he called it the Broadway Deli. And it was really good, because I think he made his own bread and everything.
Right.
And then on the table, they had gray Poupon mustard. And, being the...
What?
Yeah, exactly. But being the jerk that I am, I go, Michelle, I said, this is really good, but you really should use like a kind of a deli mustard.
A hot deli mustard, of course.
And this was years ago anyway. And he looked at me like, go after yourself. But then the place closed eventually. It didn't work. So I would love to do a great deli and, slightly, because it's not the healthiest food in the world. And that's what I would say to you is, at one point in my life, I was like, all this food that we eat in restaurants is really caloric. It's very and salted and it's not necessarily good for you. So I should open a restaurant that's heart and healthy. And I did. I opened a restaurant called Heartbeat in the W Hotel on 49th Street. It's still there, but I don't think they do anything that we used to do. The chef was a guy named Michel Nishan, who later went on to open the dressing room with Paul Newman. But nobody, it's like the whole idea of less butter, less cream, less salt. It goes away for a minute and then it comes back. And then all these restaurants like Bad Roman or, all these places, like you look at the food on Instagram. And by the way, that's the greatest new thing about food. Like you can see all these restaurants on Instagram or any restaurant, type in Yelp and the name of the restaurant. And not that Yelp is a great site, but you see pictures of the food,
right,
pictures of the place, pictures of the menu. We used to have the Zagat survey. That was it. We used to have to walk to the restaurant and look in the window to see if maybe there was a menu in the window.
So does this mean we're eating better as a society?
No, I don't think we're eating better, but at least we're more informed. When you've hit a home run, you know what it is? You eat something and you say, I want to go there another time. And I don't know about you, but I go to certain neighborhood restaurants, because I live in the boonies out here in Rockland County. And I go to the same restaurant sometimes, but I always have the same dish. Because there's always like one thing that restaurants do well, pasta or something like that. And so my acid test is you're eating food. And it's luck of the draw if, you order a $38 chicken dish and it's terrible. But if you land on something that you really enjoy, you're going to go back to it.
Drew, you're an absolute delight to talk with. And frankly, I could do this forever, but the clock says we've got to wrap it up.
So come visit me one day. We'll have lunch at Nobu, dinner at Tribeca. Just call me when you're going to be in town.
That is the greatest invitation. And my daughter lives there, so I will take you up on it.
All right. Well, Tribeca's only there 34 years, so.
Okay, it'll last.
Yeah, exactly.
Drew, thank you so much.
All right, David, you got it.
Restaurant legend Drew Nieporent. When they finally build the culinary Mount Rushmore, he'll be up there. On our next episode, 2024 James Beard Award winner Christina Wynn, who is serving up adventurous and often little-known dishes from all across Southeast Asia at her restaurant Hi Hi in Minneapolis. Here's a taste of our conversation when I asked her about screaming chefs and toxic kitchens.
I just don't think that kind of workplace flies anymore. Sure, you could shame somebody and traumatize them into doing better, but is that truly going to create a space that people want to be in? We have a really largely female upper management team, and we just have kind of a no assholes policy. People who are going to have any kind of weird misogynistic behavior, they're out.
Christina Wynn, fresh from being named the James Beard Best Chef in the Midwest for 2024. My guest on our next episode of Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'll see you then.